Welcome back to Public Square, and I want to turn to Dan and talk about CYFD's role in all this. All the pre-K programs that you have require family engagement, as I understand. So
Yes.
What does that look like? It requires it. How do you make it happen?
Well, I think it's always a challenge for a center-based classroom program to engage parents. But I think that, as you talked about earlier, it can be as simple as sharing with parents how they can engage their children in their learning when they go to the supermarket, or when they're driving down the road, or when they're reading the McDonald's sign, and helping parents understand that literacy and reading begins very early, and they can help support that by helping to set the table, helping to sort the socks on a Saturday morning. There are all sorts of everyday activities that parents can use to support their children's learning.
Early childhood efforts got a little bit more money in the legislative session.
We got some, yes.
What does that mean for you and for expanding?
This year particularly, it was interesting because many years we all have to go to the legislature and convince legislators that early childhood is important. It didn't seem that we had to do that this year. The challenge was trying to figure out where the money would come from. And what we're going to be able to do with home visiting money, pre-K money, child care money is restore services, expand services, and create new services in communities that are unserved.
Why did legislators feel that early childhood was important this year when they hadn't felt so necessarily in the past?
I think it's because of a lot of the work that people sitting here have done. And I think that we have had legislators go on home visits with home visitors. We've had legislators spend time in early childhood classrooms, YDI and other programs. And when you see high quality programs, and then you go to programs that are struggling with their quality, it becomes obvious to people that quality does make a difference, that professional development makes a difference, that an understanding of cognition makes a difference, and they want to know how to support that.
My theory from a member was that once the threat of having to tap the permanent fund came along, and the threat of having the legislature allow the voters to decide how to spend $150 million, there were a few more bones thrown our way for $10 and $20 million. That's a member's cynical view, but
well, that Ellen, since Ellen's the non-New Mexican here, there was an effort to fund all this by tapping into our land grant permanent fund. Was not successful, but all of a sudden there was more money for early childhood. So that's one theory.
I think it's an indicator that people recognize that early childhood education is important, and not only important but critical, because we have a lot of children that aren't doing well in New Mexico.
So give us an idea of what percentage of kids are getting early childhood efforts, intervention, care.
One of the things that we're doing, and the reason that we got a new federal Race to the Top funding grant.
And what does that fund?
What it's funding is actually improving the quality in early childhood services in the state and creating a system of quality. We have a program called Look for the Stars, and so we have quality rating criteria that are attached to all the child care programs in the state. And so what we're doing is we're revising that based on new research, and so that we're calling it Focus, because we want teachers to focus on children's learning and try to ensure that they're ready for kindergarten.
But do we know, do we have any sense? We're not reaching even, it's certainly not universal, but in terms of whatever we want to call it.
We're not, but actually when you think of all the children that are in early childhood settings,
yeah,
if we could improve the quality of those settings where children already are,
yeah,
we're pretty far along. We would be reaching the great majority of children in New Mexico.
Peggy, I'm sorry, you were.
Oh, it was back to the why the change in the legislature, so I'm kind of going back. But I think a lot of it is they're listening to their constituency. I mean, you know, these parents that are getting exposed to high quality programming, or they've been bitten, you know, and they're being empowered. And I know the moms from my community were writing letters. They had a letter writing campaign, and even though they were in Spanish or may have been in Vietnamese, they were still writing those letters saying, you know, we need this support. We need this because it's changing our lives. And I think how wonderful is that? That's powerful.
Go ahead, Heather.
What has happened in the last 12, 13 years of the research that has come forward for early childhood is phenomenal. And it's been that research, I think, has helped to shift our thinking about how we see children and how we need to meet children's needs. And without that body of research, we can't refute the fact that we need to be doing more and better for our children, because it says so in what we know what children can accomplish in these younger years. And so I think it's our responsibility to really be mindful of that research and how that's going to drive our intentions.
One thing Ellen talks about is surround strategy. You're talking about meeting the multiple needs of a family to ensure the success of early brain development. How much is that happening where we're addressing these multiple needs, because we're in a poor state, and I think that's why I think this is relevant. Families have a ton of needs here.
Some families need full-day care, and they need to have their pre-K program embedded in a care program that provides early morning or late afternoon care. At the public education department, our pre-K programs are half-day programs typically, and many parents drop their children off and pick them up. In other cases, our programs are in rural areas, and the children are getting on buses, and they're having a bus ride to that school, and they're spending, 3 hours at school and then riding home, because mom and dad don't have transportation. And if they did have transportation, they probably couldn't afford the gas that it would take to bring that 4-year-old into school every day. So I think between the two agencies, we look at where we have programs, we talk about how we can meet the needs of that community, and how we can collaborate.
How much does PED incorporate the new discoveries in brain science? I gather there's a lag, not just in New Mexico, but generally, and because it's advanced so quickly as a field, right? And sometimes large organizations don't change as quickly.
That's true. And when you're looking at PED, we have 89 school districts in our state. And so getting that information out across all those school districts. And some of the things that we're doing is we're bringing teachers together regionally. We've had a number of institutes for kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers looking at research, not just brain research, but latest literacy research, and bringing those teachers together so that they can communicate with their colleagues. Many of our rural teachers, there may be one kindergarten teacher in the district. And so that kindergarten teacher, he or she needs someone to talk to, someone to bounce ideas. And our goal is to include our pre-K teachers in some of those, to schedule it so that our pre-K teachers and our kindergarten teachers are having time to interface.
I think that in New Mexico, one of the things that we've done is we've really stayed true to early childhood principles. And I think it makes a huge difference. I think that we really value play and children's play. And finally, we have a large body of research that shows the importance of play as learning, and that play through learning. And I think that we have felt very strongly about that for many, many years.
I think every year it gets a little better. I think that more about mental health, about development, about children's needs makes it out into the public. And I think we're finally starting to see at the legislative level that they have the mandate from their voters that put them in office to reflect this in what they're doing. And that's a positive.
Go ahead.
I also think one of the critical changes has been the acceptance in the business community of understanding that without children who are functioning well and who can learn and who know how to function in society, they're not going to have anybody to run their businesses. I mean, you know, if you look at return on investment, you know, it's unbelievable the ROI you get from starting at early childhood with proper education.
There's a comparable buy-in from our military. There was a statement that came out a few. Did you guys hear about this? It was several weeks ago, and they were doing a study of what would it take to improve things in the military. How can we address that we have had so many training problems with recruits coming in, and that the threshold for what it takes to be eligible to join the military keeps getting lowered? And they said, well, the answer is we need to start embracing early childhood education. And to talk about just the whole system's grasp it takes to come to that conclusion, but they're right.
What I hear all the time in the business community is that people get out of school with a fill-in-the-bubble mentality when we need innovative thinkers, that people just compete with each other when we need people who can work in teams because we're not going to solve problems unless there's people working together, that people don't know how to think critically, but with so much information they're going to have to learn to think critically. I think that was what led to the Core Common State Standards. We need different kinds of people to thrive in our society as well as in our workforce.
How does that jive with the heavy emphasis on testing, not just in New Mexico, but the rest of the country? I don't know if, Brenda, you can address that.
In New Mexico, a few years ago, we rethought how we evaluated. Most of our standards-based assessment have a component that is short answer. It's problem solving. I think it's something that we've looked at, is that we have to value problem solving. We have to value creative thinking. We have to value the process that the child goes through to come up with the answer. I also think with the Common Core State Standards, one of the things that just made me cheer as a former kindergarten teacher was the phrase, with prompting and support, which fits right into, you know, what we know about brain development, that those kids need the modeling, they need the support before they're released and required to do this on their own.
Can, for the benefit of our viewers, one of you define quickly the Common Core State Standards? It's a phrase we hear a lot.
Common Core State Standards have been adopted by 46 of the 50 states in the country. And right now we have them in both English language arts and in math. Science was just released this week. And essentially what they've done is thought about what does a high school graduate need to know and be able to do to be successful in the workplace or in college or in the military or in life, and then backwards plan that. So what does that look like then at the high school level, middle school level, elementary level, all the way through to third grade? What several of us in this room have started to think about is, now how do we integrate the science of early learning to continue that backward planning, if you will, all the way to birth? So how do we leverage what we know about child development and brain development to help partner deeply with families and engaging parents as leaders, teachers as leaders, and principals as leaders in moving that work forward?
And there, you are the one state that has tried to link Core Common State Standards with early childhood. So we have a long way to go in a lot of things in this country when we're addressing some of these problems, but you all have been really a leader here.
Go ahead, Heather.
We're also have, with the early childhood guidelines as well as the Common Core, have done this crosswalk with 7 essential skills.
The number of teachers who had had an introduction to the 7 essential skills, so they kind of had that under their belts and had been playing with it. And then the Common Core State Standards came around, and you know, when they got together a couple of weeks ago, no, just last Monday, to look at how these two things intersect, they saw that there was a way that a new way of looking at curriculum through these 7 essential skills.
These are the skills Ellen outlined
Yes.
In my making.
that children need to know to be fully rounded learners.
And one of the big shifts that happened was that suddenly these adults recognized that these are not only early childhood skills,
My 5th grade teacher.
these are skills we all need. We need them as adults, because otherwise children are not going to get them. They're not going to know what they are. We have to practice them, and it's a lifelong learning trajectory.
I really think a key piece to this whole chain is definitely secondary education and our teacher preparation programs. Because I know when I went through my program, it was K through 8. And I took maybe one class in early childhood development. And we never talked about it, we never thought about it. It was, what do I do with the 5-year-old to the 12-year-old? I mean, that was my whole core thing. The other thing that I think that they need to do is they need to do more about family development. So when I think teachers think, oh, I have my 25 kids and that's who I'm going to work with. You also have their parents, you have their grandparents, you have the Nino, the Nina, the stepmom, the old girlfriend, the ex, you have everybody. And I don't think we talk about that enough. And they're not prepared, because I know my novice teachers struggle with that. And they have a hard time communicating, you know, I have to do 2 conferences because I have to do them with mom, and then I have to do them with dad, and they can't be at the same time because they don't talk. And, you know, and I don't think we're preparing for them. We're preparing teachers to do that in
So they need to change
university.
the post-secondary curriculum.
Absolutely. And plus about community schools, and that you're not just going to work from 8 to 2. You may have to have an after-school program, Saturday programs, and things like that, because I think
Where does the
Needs to
making that
change.
happen lie? Is that PED? Is that the the schools of education? Is it?
the teachers' unions as well.
Okay.
Not that accountability isn't important. I don't think anybody minds being accountable for what they do. But there's a shift from accountability to intentionality. And I think that when you're intentional in what you do, then accountability just comes. And you can be accountable for what you do. And there's more of an emphasis on really looking at the research, learning from the research, and translating the research into practice.
I wanted to ask, Victor, if you're listening to all of this, where do you think the youth voice might be helpful to be included in this discussion? Because we talked about that's not always included.
I think it's important. Each child learns differently. So I think that's why there needs to be different ways to teach the children. The youth voice is important because they're the ones learning, you know? They're the ones learning. They're the ones that know how their minds work, and they can assist the teachers and their parents and everything in processing all that.
It was the youth voice that led to Mind in the Making. I didn't intend ever to do Mind in the Making. We do a series of studies that ask young people how they feel about the issues that they face growing up. It was a study on youth and learning where I found too many kids were not just dropping out of school, but dropping out of learning.
What I've heard a lot is we're bored in school. There's nothing for us to do with, like the standard-based assessments. I mean, I know they're important, but kids don't see the connection in the classroom to those tests. And we did in the Little Feet Walk Louder workshop, we discussed how early childhood development and brain development would be less expensive than building these jails or having, you know, so you know, we need to start funding those programs instead of saying, oh, these youth, because they can't read by 3rd grade, they're gonna probably end up in prison. You know, that's a negative way to look at it, and it's not positive. We're underappreciated, we feel underappreciated because we hear the negativity instead of saying this is what we can do.
Now we're wrapping up the show. What do we need to do?
Put the money in the playpen, not in the state pen.
So if we can just think about one of the tenets of your action items, or one of your action items is to reward effort and creativity, not success on a written handout, right? We could take that idea a lot of places. We could take it to the legislature, we could take it to the school boards, and we can get, you know, people in charge and leaders to think about what are we trying to accomplish? Protect our status quo, or are we trying to make a quantum leap here? So it's pretty simple. The change of perspective is so important.
And you said if we could make where kids are right now, in terms of every place that they are, if it can make it high quality, what is that going to take?
I think that people need to become aware of the fact and acknowledge that children are living in homes where there's tremendous chaos and trauma, And just as Pam was saying, that trauma is impacting their brain negatively. And I think acknowledging that and then investing in making it possible for those children to have the same opportunity so that there's an equitable opportunity for kids to be successful when they get to kindergarten. It's not equal, and they don't have an equal opportunity for success.
It's everyone's responsibility. And where can you find your niche? Where can you fit in? If you're a business owner, then how can you help give funding or your resources or your talents back to programs that you know are working? It's just everybody's responsibility.
Right.
And we can't say, oh, it's them, that it's because of the schools, it's because of these parents, it's because they're poor, it's because...
Like everyone from a very personal level to a systemic level needs to ask the question of how is this affecting the children?
And what can I do?
And what can we do personally as well as
Right.
systemically?
I think it all goes to what we're learning in what you've brought up and what Ellen Galinsky brings up is that we understand neuroscience so much better. And we know that everybody has a certain set of DNA, but the way our genes are expressed are influenced by the chemicals that our bodies are exposed to, be it adrenaline and cortisol, which have negative effects, or we can have positive effects on the development of the brain. And so I think that's where it's critical, and we know that now, and it's hard science. It's not anymore touchy-feely psychosocial aspects. This is real.
If I had one wish, it would be that each of us keep that fire burning in children's eyes for learning, because we need a society where people are going to be lifelong learners. I think we all know what it takes, and we can do it to be a brain builder.
Thank you very much for joining us on Public Square and having this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.